Welcome back to the Optimize You podcast, the place where we're helping you optimize looking and feeling your best. If you enjoy the show, be sure to share it with a friend, like, and subscribe. And let's get into today's podcast. So one of the things that I hear a lot, specifically from women, is I want to have better toned. I want to be more toned. I don't hear it so much from the guy side of things, and it's not that they don't want it. It's just a verbiage. It's kind of interesting. It's a verbiage that women love to use, and it's this word toned. And so I know what they mean, and being able to describe specifically what they mean, I think is really important. So putting a definition to that. So literally speaking a definition, that's really what women want. That's in people in general, right? For the most part, when they're talking about their body composition. And so there's a couple different ways to go about it. So today we're going to talk about not just the word toned, but going about it if your goal is to improve. Let's say you want more toned arms, you want more toned legs, you want a more toned body, etc. It's something that I hear a lot, specifically talking with a lot of people, and more specifically, women love to use this word. And so let's dissect it. I've heard it over the years, and let's break it down a little bit. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some actionable steps so that you can actually improve and get more toned legs, toned arms, a more toned body overall. And what are the specific steps that I would recommend, specifically if you're just getting started, especially if you're just getting started? What can you do right here, right now, based on where you're at in your journey to be more toned? So I think it's important to define it first and foremost. So when we say toned, or when you say toned to me, or when a potential client says, hey, Matt, these are my goals. I want to have more toned legs. I want to have more toned arms, etc. I know immediately what they mean in my head, but I think it's very important to establish what the actionable steps are in creating the right and correct mindset around it to set you up for success. And I'm going to we'll dive into that so I can show you exactly what I'm talking about here. When somebody says they want their leg, let's just say legs, for example, somebody wants to have more toned legs. Great. That's an awesome goal. What I think people immediately jump to in their head is I want to have, specifically women, is I want to have skinnier legs. I want to be skinny. I want my legs to be skinnier. Right. And they use that word as well. So if we're talking about a toned look, we're talking about more defined, more prominent definition in the legs, not necessarily bigger, right? We want to be smaller, but we want to have a little bit more definition as well, like the perfect tone. We don't want to be super ripped, but we would like to have a little bit more definition. We could see a little bit more contrast or shadows, not just this smooth, bulky, fat leg, right? And I know that's what you mean, and you want to improve that. You want to improve that. Not only you might have goals of improving your health overall, but if one of the goals is specifically improving how toned you are, I know that's exactly what you mean. So I think it's important to understand that. So when you say that, instead of getting skinny, right? Because getting skinny just involves losing weight. And remember, fat loss and weight loss are two totally different things. So if we were just trying to get skinny, think like marathon runner. It is not beneficial to a marathon runner to hold a lot of muscle on their body, right? They need to be extremely efficient. They need to go for long durations. So a lot of times you're going to see extremely lean, skinny endurance runners so that they can meet the demands and requirements of their sport. They can be extremely efficient at what they do. And in order to do that, they need to retain or hold on to as little muscle mass as possible so that they can go for long durations, right? They need to be really efficient at what they do. So when you say skinny, that means weight loss. That means we're going to be losing lean body mass and body fat together, right? Which is not necessarily beneficial for setting us up for longevity. Everything in terms of improving your metabolic rate, just improving our ability to increase stability as we age. It's extremely difficult, right, to sustain and keep the amount of muscle mass that we already have, especially as we age. So it gets more and more challenging, more and more difficult to do so. So it's extremely important. And so when we want to achieve this toned look, really what we're saying is we want to decrease our body fat and increase our muscle tissue. And so in order to do those, another name for it is body recomposition. And if you haven't already looked up the size of a pound of body fat versus a pound of muscle, lean muscle tissue, go ahead and Google that, look that up, because I think immediately, specifically women, they're in this category, and some men too, but women, for some reason, they immediately think the second that they start resistance training and working out consistently and lifting weights, that they're going to blow up and get super bulky. So here's I'm going to give you two things that you have to shift from a mental standpoint to be successful, to be able to achieve the toned look or be more toned. Number one is, again, if you haven't already looked up a pound of body fat and a pound of muscle tissue, look those up and look at the size difference. So the muscle tissue, you're going to notice, is a fraction of the size of the pound of body fat. They both equally weigh the same amount of weight, but the space, the volume that they take up is completely different. A pound of fat is going to have a lot more volume, it's going to be much bigger. So when you say, I don't want to get bulky from lifting weights, look at how much bulk a pound of fat puts on versus lean body tissue or muscle mass. Okay, so that's something that you need to check out first. So Google that, look up those two different pictures, ingrain that in your head and go, okay, I'm going to be more bulky the more fat that I carry on my body. Okay, so that's first and foremost. That has to be a mental shift for you. I think, trust me, you're not going to put on the amount of muscle mass that you think you're going to in a handful of months. It's not going to happen, right? It's physically impossible. Plus, women carry lower amounts of testosterone, so that's working against you as well, too. So the cards are not stacked in your favor to get bulky immediately right off the bat. It takes a lot. It takes way more than what you perceive as a lot or high volume or lifting at some sort of consistency for an extended period of time. It takes way more than you can imagine. Trust me. There's people that devote their life to this, and and I think that's what people easily reference to is they're comparing to the women on the CrossFit Games. They're comparing to bodybuilders. They're comparing for people who do this for a living. We're talking 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week for you individually, whereas these people have dedicated their entire life for decades, right? to be able to achieve a very specific look. We're just getting started here. So trust me, you're not going to ramp up and beat a bodybuilder and make it to the CrossFit Games in a handful of months. Okay, I promise you that. If you do, you're an extremely rare breed. And you could probably be in we'll call up Guinness for the world record, right? We'll put you in Guinness if that's the case. But for the other 99.9%, we need to start first and foremost engaging in some sort of resistance training. So if the goal is to build and increase the muscle mass, in order to do that, we have to be on a progressive approach, and we actually have to lift weights. And this is really important to understand. If the goal is to become toned, in order to become toned, we need to increase the amount of muscle mass, and we need to build some strength, and we need to decrease our body fat specifically, not just weight loss, but we want to lose body fat so that we can see what we're building. We can create that tonedness. We can create more definition. We can actually see the hard work that we've been putting in. In order to do that, to build muscle, we need to continuously and progressively, very strategically with your programming, it needs to be in an order where you are going through multiple different cycles in order to progress and build. And what I mean by that is really focusing on things like the compound lifts, right? Pressing variation, bench or overhead press, a pulling variation or a row, right? And some sort of hip hinging or squat movements. Those are going to be extremely beneficial. And that's where I recommend everybody to start, is with the fundamentals. Very basic. So if you're not familiar with those movements, I would first and foremost start there, and you need to find a very strategic program, somebody that is programming for you. Don't just wing it. And where each week you're looking to improve either the form and technique, especially if you're just starting out, but always. And you're looking to progress in a couple different ways, either intensity, meaning the loading that you have on the bar, or you can improve the amount of repetitions. You can repeat the same weight, but you need to be performing in a progressive fashion where as the weeks add up, you're getting better and better and you're showing improvement. So tracking your data is going to be super important in your workouts. You can't just wing it. And we're not talking about going to HIIT classes, doing a bunch of cardio. We're talking about building muscle, which requires resistance. We need time under tension. That's really what it's about. We're not talking about going to your Orange Theories and your HIIT classes and getting out of breath and sweating like crazy, right? Remember, that's not going to build muscle tissue. It might at first because you're extremely open and adaptive and your body's going to change. But a lot of times you see those people, specifically if they don't manipulate their nutrition or aren't consistent with their nutrition, they look the same all the time. They have these awesome, crazy results when they first start, and then they hit a plateau. And it's because they're not doing things in a progressive fashion to continuously improve week in and week out. They may be improving from a cardiorespiratory state. That's great. But if you're not doing anything to build muscle mass continuously and progressively, achieving that toned look is going to be extremely difficult. So you have to build muscle. And in order to do that, you have to build strength. You have to get stronger. And in order to do that, you need to do so in a very progressive fashion, in a very strategic program. And you need to lift weights. You have to lift weights, right? Your body, you need to introduce your body to that stimulus that says, hey, we need to accommodate this resistance here. We need to spend more time under tension. We need to break down, recover, repair, and get stronger for next time. And you need to repeat that process over and over and over, very strategically. On even like a mediocre or average program, you can still have phenomenal results. It just comes down to the consistency. So that's first and foremost, getting that program. And if you're just starting out, 2 to 3 days a week. If you're a little bit more advanced, you can go 3 to 4, but you don't need more than that. It's about the quality of each session. So don't think you have to throw a ton of sessions in each week. It's really the quality of the sessions that you're doing is by far the most important thing. So I would start there. The second thing is making sure that we talked about building muscle, right? So first and foremost, the second thing is making sure that we are in a position to lose body fat. In order to do that, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, we have to be in a caloric deficit. So in order to achieve that, we need to understand and know what the amount of food or fuel or energy, that's essentially what it is, that we're currently consuming. If you don't know that, it'll be extremely difficult. It'll just be a guessing game. It's not to say that it's impossible, but really your only option is, if you don't know that, is to completely revamp your nutrition and your intake by including single ingredient, high quality whole foods, right? And that has to be the majority of your intake if you don't take the time to create the awareness around how much you're actually consuming. Because trust me, although it is difficult, you can overconsume food, higher quality foods, healthier foods, and you can still gain weight. It's a little bit more difficult because the amount of protein and fiber in those foods, and you're now consuming high quality foods, but it is possible. So you still totally can do it. So creating the awareness around portion size and control is going to be extremely key in order to help you lose body fat specifically, not just weight loss, but lose body fat. So if we know and understand, the easiest way to do this is I tell people to journal or download MyFitnessPal and just track for the next 7 days. Don't change anything. Just eat like how you normally would. If you have your glasses of wine, if you're eating your charcuterie boards and you're going out to eat your fast food, like keep all that the same. Literally have an entirely normal week, what you would deem as normal for you, and track and just see what you're consuming on a weekly basis. And once you have that across those 7 days, just add it up, divide it by 7. And then now you have an average on about pretty accurately how much food you consume on average on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, so that is technically your current maintenance. In order for you to stay exactly where you're at right now, that's how much food, that's how much fuel, that's how much energy you're consuming. Now you have ultimate control, right, to make manipulations to that, to put yourself into a caloric deficit so that you can begin burning body fat, because that's technically only the way that you'll be able to burn body fat. Now, when you're focusing on consistently working out, you're focusing on getting stronger, building muscle, right? And you dump all your energy into that. I think one huge caveat that we didn't talk about is if you just focused on building muscle and improving your nutrition, and you didn't worry about what the scale said, I promise you're going to be better off if your goal is to achieve this quote unquote toned look, right? If we want to be more defined, if we want to be more toned, you're going to be much better off. Reason is if you're dumping all your emotional eggs into the basket of every time I step on the scale, oh, it hasn't moved. That means I must not be doing the right things. I must need to do more. It must be that I need to do something different. You'll keep chasing your tail and you'll keep starting over and over and over, versus the person that has the same goals, but their approach is different. So if the goal is, I want to be more toned, I want to have more definition in my body, I want to lose body fat, and I want to build muscle, and now all my energy and focus is dumped into that, and I don't care what the scale says, I just want to care how my body feels and how I look, great. That person's hard to stop because they're so focused on the activities of hitting their weight training consistently week in and week out, and what they're consuming from a food standpoint, which in turn, guess what? Ultimately drives the outcome of being more toned, of being more defined. But the person that's so worried about the scale and how much they weigh, and they're dumping their emotional eggs into that basket, it's enough to derail them. They could be doing everything perfect. They could be doing everything phenomenal. They could be doing everything right. But the second they step on that scale, let's say for water retention's sake, the scale fluctuates up and they throw in the towel, they give up, they say, this isn't working. When in actuality, their body is processing exactly like how it should be. And so that's a huge thing too that I don't think a lot of people talk about, is that if you focus so much on the scale and you allow that to determine whether you're going to continue to do the activities that actually yield the toned body, you're going to be in a long road. And I think a lot of people are already there in that boat, meaning they're so hyper focused on the scale. Look, with my clients, I have them weigh every single day. And the reason we do that is so that you can see how your body operates on a day-to-day basis and understand that fluctuations up and fluctuations down are completely normal. There might be a day where you're up 4 or 5 pounds. The next day you might be back down 2 or 3. The next day you might stay the same. So we take weekly averages. A weekly average is going to tell you a lot more than any one day individually by itself, specifically with women and the battle with the fluctuation in hormones that you will experience each and every single month is a great example, right? So around your period, you're going to retain more water. The scale is going to fluctuate a lot more. Not to mention, if you had higher amounts of higher amounts of carbohydrate on any one particular day. Remember, one carb, if you didn't know this, 1 gram of carbohydrate is accommodated or required with 3 grams, about roughly 3 grams of water. So the more carbohydrates you're eating, the more water retention you're going to have. So of course the scale is going to go up. Are carbs good? Yes, carbs are phenomenal. We need those. It's our body's main preferred energy source. And specifically, if we're looking to build muscle, we need those energy fuels and those energy stores on our side. Now, I think a lot of people demonize carbs and they just go, carbs make you fat. Carbs retain water. Excess calories can make you fat. So remember that. Don't get those confused. There's a lot of things that need to be digested from a mental standpoint if you want to be successful in your journey. These are things that I teach in my program. If you guys follow me on social media, these are the things I'm always diving into because I want people to be successful in their journey. And I see little mindset shifts in the perspective in which we choose to view our process through, and what lens somebody is choosing to look through can make or break their journey. And so it's really everything. I can give you all the tactics, I can give you all the strategies, but if you don't have it between the ears from a mental standpoint and you're not viewing your process through the correct lens, your journey is going to be extremely difficult. It'll be very short-lived, in which I'm sure those of you that are listening to this, if you have experienced that before, think about considering how you're choosing to view your process. Really sit back and go, okay, am I focused so much on the short-term outcome? If my goal is to become toned, am I an emotional wreck every time I step on the scale and it fluctuates up? Do I feel like a failure? If that's the case, I recommend just throwing the scale out, hiding the scale, put it in the closet, don't even use it. We can go based on waist measurements. We could go based on your biofeedback, how your body's feeling, energy levels, how you're doing emotionally, etc. Those things. And really what it'll do is it'll take away one less thing for you to have to worry about. And it's actually a big thing. So if it's taking up a lot of your brain power and capacity and bandwidth, then we're going to eliminate that so that you can take all that energy that you were dumping and wasting into emotionally worrying about the scale. We can actually dump it into things that really matter. And in this case, if your goal is to be more toned, create more definition, you want more toned arms, you want more toned legs, you want a toned body overall, then we need to focus everything and all our attention on first and foremost feeling amazing, right? We want to feel amazing. We want to make sure we're fueling our body properly, and more specifically hitting protein targets. Okay. So we haven't talked about that yet, but if the goal is to build more muscle, we want to increase strength, we also have to pay attention to how much protein we're consuming. Okay. So these are really the big three. So we're going to, I'll rewind. The big one is number one, and these are in no particular order. These are just the three things that you have to focus on. They're all equally as important. we have to consistently resistance train. If you're a beginner, 2 to 3 times a week. If you're a little bit more intermediate to advanced, 3 to 4 times a week max. Maybe 5 would be an exception for somebody, but your training age or the amount of years that you have with experience needs to be pretty high. So we need to lift weights, and we need to do so in a very strategic and progressive fashion in order to build muscle, right? We need to focus on getting stronger week in and week out, improving our form and technique. The next one is, if we're building muscle, we need to make sure we're stacking the percentages in our favor by consuming enough protein. Protein does a lot of good things for us. Uh, a good place to start is anywhere from 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, or your goal weight, right? You could do that. And honestly, that comes down to experimentation and what feels good for you. Now, you don't have to skyrocket this number up super fast. So if you take your 7 days and you're like, man, out of those 7 days, let me click on the protein category. Man, I consumed 60 grams of protein and my goal should be around 150, right? Don't go from 60 right up to 150. You can go from 60, add 20 grams to that, shoot for 80 grams this week, right? If you're feeling good, because what happens is if you increase the amount of protein a little bit too quickly, sometimes you can experience digestive issues just because your body's not used to it. So think about increasing your protein in a very progressive fashion. Okay. So resistance training strategically, more specifically, progressively overloading. We need to hit protein targets. And the last one is making sure that we're putting ourselves in a caloric deficit to be able to lose body fat. So we need to do those 7 days. Like I told you guys, go across 7 days. Think about, okay, how much food am I consuming on average? Add those 7 days up, divide by 7. Okay, let's just say it's 2,000 calories. Okay, in order for 2,000 calories, a good place to start to put myself in a caloric deficit is around 15 to 20%. It's a good ballpark range. This comes down to experimentation and how everybody's body's different. And you really want to pay attention to how your body reacts. But if you put yourself in a 15 to 20% caloric deficit from that average, that 7-day average that you took, that should be enough. Generally speaking, that should be enough to put you, assuming your movement stays the same, that should be enough to put you in a caloric deficit. If not, a couple different things you can do is create. So if you put yourself in a caloric deficit, say you put yourself in that 15 to 20%, and you've been there for a few weeks and nothing's happening, nothing's changing. The inches on your waist aren't moving. The scale stays pretty much the same, or it actually goes up. Then technically you're not in a caloric deficit. Right. And a couple things that you could do instead of taking your food down even more is start paying attention to, this is the bonus tip, is start paying attention to how many steps you're taking in a day. So if you have an iPhone, you already have a pedometer built in there in the health app. It'll tell you how many steps you're taking on average right now. So you could just pop that open. It'll tell you daily, weekly, monthly, 6 months, and then your year average. So it'll give you all that data. And what you can do is just bump your steps, your current average, your current weekly average by 2,000 steps. That's what I recommend. Anywhere from like 1,500 to 2,000 steps from your current average. So before you go pulling more calories down after you already did that 15 to 20%, just add 2,000 steps to your current daily average and see what that does. Run that for another 3 to 4 weeks, assuming you're consistent. And I bet you start seeing some results there. And it's doing that time and time again and being extremely consistent with, first and foremost, your resistance training. Right? Again, these are in no particular order, but I'm just naming these the most important things off to create that toned look, to be more defined, to improve your body composition. You have to resistance train consistently. You have to do so in a progressive fashion where you're progressively getting stronger week in and week out. Then you have to be hyper aware of how much protein you're consuming. Make sure you're getting enough. And the cool thing about consuming enough protein is that it burns more calories at rest, which is super cool. It's going to help you stay satiated, helps you stay fuller for longer. There's so many benefits from it. But if you're not hyper aware of your protein, it's going to be extremely difficult to build muscle tissue consistently. So those two things: resistance train, make sure you're getting enough protein, make sure you're the current 7-day average of how much calories you're consuming to put yourself into a caloric deficit. Recommend anywhere from 15 to 20% from your current intake, right? So take 15 to 20% of that, subtract that from your total, and then that's your new caloric intake. And then if things still aren't moving in like a 4 or 5 week span, you got to give it enough time. You got to be super patient. Then be hyper aware of how many steps you're taking. Steps is a great way to help track consistently how much energy you're expending. And if you're If you have that total, just like we talked about from a caloric standpoint, if you know your weekly average, which you should all have that currently, it's currently tracking on your phone, whether you want to or not, or you're aware of it or not. But subconsciously, you have a pedometer in your phone and it's already tracking your steps. If you have an Apple Watch, same thing. So just make sure you keep your phone on you when you go for a walk or you're going about your day. And once you have that number, if things aren't moving, just add 2,000 steps, 1,500 to 2,000 steps. Run that for 4 to 6 weeks, and you probably start to see things moving in the right direction. But this all comes down. This is all just advice, and it all comes down to how consistently you adhere to the process. And so hopefully that was able to be super helpful for you. You're able to take away at least some key nuggets for yourself to help set you up for success. If you found this super helpful, make sure you share it with somebody. Or if you have a girlfriend or a friend that's like, you're like, man, you know what? This is exactly what we talk about. This is why we're stuck. We haven't been trying these things that Matt's talking about. Implement them, do it consistently, and I'd love to hear how your journey's going. Remember, you have to make sure that you're viewing your process through the correct lens and being extremely patient. So if that scale is messing with you mentally and you feel like giving up all the time, just get rid of it. You don't have to weigh yourself. And then you can use that bandwidth and that brain power and that capacity in the things that we actually talked about. I gave you 3 main steps to start with today, and I gave you a bonus tip with the steps, so actually 4. And if you do those things and you do them over a long enough time horizon, I promise you, you will achieve that toned look that you're going for, that more defined look, that recompositioning of your body, of building more muscle and losing more body fat. And I promise you, you will be super, super happy, just like my clients are, and they are changing their life. But it's only because they're putting in the work. They're extremely consistent. They're not perfect in the process, but they just don't take no for an answer. When everybody else finds an excuse, the people who work with me, they find a way. And that's why they're successful. If they don't, then unfortunately, they're not successful, or the degree to which they feel like they're capable of, they don't reach it. And so that's the same for everybody's story. So when everybody finds an excuse, be the person who finds a way. So hopefully this was helpful. Share it with somebody who you know, like, and love, could benefit from it. That's all we ask. And we will see you on next week's episode.